Do you think the vegan movement has a white problem?
The vegan movement is racist. If we look at some of the top vegan activists that have paved the way, they're white. Our globalized food system in America wasn't built by Americans. It was built by the people of the global south. In a society that's already choosing to degrade the land, the women, racialize minorities, we're mistreating our ancestors who fought to be here today.
Do you think you need to be rich to be sustainable or vegan?
Yes, I do agree that you do need to have excess of income to live more sustainably in the ways of your choices of products. Low-income people actually have rich cultural knowledge of sustainability already embedded in them. It's just that it's not marketable. It's not glamorized.
You know, when people talk about how India and China are some of the most polluting countries in the world, it doesn't account for the fact that we produce so many goods that the global north consumes.
Plastic in America is sent to Asian countries, which is why they have high amounts of plastic and America has low, because it's shipped out.
Today's guest is an environmentalist, a storyteller, a content creator, an activist and advocate for environmental justice, a voice for the planet, animals, the marginalized communities. You are a graduate from UC Berkeley, right? And a degree in environmental science as well.
Yeah.
He's queer, he's brown and vegan, goes by the moniker Queer Brown Vegan. Isaias, welcome to Sustainable Tea with Shreya. Thank you so much for doing this with me. I have been in so many common spaces with you. I was at COP28. I remember seeing you at the Cultural Pavilion, and you've inspired and shaped my story for as long as I've been vegan. Thank you for speaking up for those that don't often get the microphone. And I know what it takes. But the identities that you use queer, brown, and vegan. You're missing the environmentalist there, but the fact that you are so proud of all of these labels, has there ever been a backlash?
Absolutely. I think that the username Queer Brown Vegan, depending on the audience, if you are someone conservative, I'm seen as a trigger word. If you're seen as more liberal or moderate, you're seen as more welcoming or acceptance or some confusion to what it is. And I think the username really came about me reclaiming my identity as an individual, but not so much this idea of the brand being who I am. The brand stands for itself, but it's to showcase to other younger generations of people who typically were not represented in the environmental movement to be able to be proud of who they are, because as someone that grew up confused about who I was growing up and not being very proud of a brown person, I had to really come to terms like those actually were my superpowers.
You see them as superpowers?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, when you come from a marginalized or racialized background, you are rooted in a cultural foundation. And so my parents are from Mexico, and I'm really proud to be a Latino myself, because I think I've learned so much from the stories of my grandparents, my great-grandparents, my ancestors. And I think when it comes to queerness, I see the world through an extension of liberation for all people, and, being able to spread that love and joy for people to understand, like, we're all trying to fight under the same umbrella of the systems that hold us against each other.
How does being queer play into you being vegan or brown?
Yeah, so queerness is actually very interesting. So I use queerness as a way for a limitless concept. So queerness to me is an expansion of cultural domains. And what I mean by that, I mean by like queer as something that is non-unsupernatural, but something natural. When we think about queerness, we often associate it with weird and peculiar and unnatural. What I'm trying to say about queerness is that queerness is as a broad range of systems that also provide symbiotic relationships to species. And so the way that I use queerness to environmentalism is talking about queer ecology, because queer ecology looks at the ways that we challenge the anthropocentric views. And when I mean anthropocentric views, I mean like the dominant science models of what we categorize as something as natural versus unnatural. And we know that in nature, like who we are, there's no such thing as a species being unnatural. All species, both the human, the non-human, have come from Earth. There's no such thing as something that came out of nowhere, right? Because all forms have life to them.
Do you see examples of queerness in nature?
Yeah, I think examples with queerness about nature is, I really want to be honest, is that queerness is nature. We have to be very careful around it. So when I use examples of queerness in nature, I use it as a metaphor. So for a lot of people, we tend to think, oh, like, mushrooms, fungi, the fauna, the flora, they're gay or they're trans. It's not so much that we're saying that their gender identity is that, because we have to remember gender is very influenced by sociocultural norms. If we're referring to, like, in science, in Western science, the biological science models of, like, this is a female flower, this is a male flower, depending on, its structure, or this non-human animal. For me, examples of queer ecology can look at the simplest diagrams. Like fungi are a very good representation of this. So a lot of people use fungi as a way of not just reflecting as a metaphor for underground communities coming to connect with each other, and to understand that the struggles that one ecosystem is dealing with is also interconnected to the mycelium that's thriving in another area. What we're trying to say is that, fungi are unique species that have a unique domain kingdom. So, fun fact, we're actually more closely related to fungi than we are to, I believe, plants or animals. And so for me, that's actually something interesting. But the second thing is that in biological science, some fungi species have, like, 10,000 plus sex species within them. And so, like, this classification of these species are so unique and rich. And so I think for queer and trans people, when they use queer ecology from a general foundation of, like, did you know penguins are gay, or like dolphins are get this, like giraffes are bisexual, whatever people may look at, it's about the ways in which our cultural society can kind of understand that in the animal kingdom, there is no such thing as homophobia or transphobia. There's no such thing as a non-human animal being slaughtered alive for engaging in same-sex behavior. And so when we look at the humanist society that is more structured around social cultural norms, we tend to interrogate that the systems that were categorizing people like me as unnatural actually came from systems of oppression. These systems of oppression have always been via capitalism, through slavery, through colonization, through, just the list goes on. And so when we unpack those types of systems, I think we can understand more and more that the educational models that are presented to us have been heavily influenced through settler colonialism, or through the influence of lost indigenous cultures that we see worldwide.
That was hard. That was hard for me, because when I just went vegan, you obviously want the whole world to know about it, and you're angry and you're screaming and you're trying to tell people why are you not vegan, and that obviously doesn't work. But being in the space of sustainability and veganism, and so many times I'm in the climate space. We were here for Climate Week in New York, and so many of these spaces don't talk about animal agriculture. They don't even serve plant-based food. So I'm used to feeling excluded. It's almost like my climate world is separate from my vegan world. Does that happen to you?
Yeah, I think the climate and environmental movement do a poor job providing plant-based foods at many events and conferences. And I think that's because, and I don't want to make allegations here, but, sponsorships is really dependent on that. I think that if we're still going to be serving, meat and fish in climate conferences, either we heavily reduce that amount or we completely switch to plant-based, because I do think that the people who complain about vegan or gluten-free menus is that they get to go back home and eat as much meat as they want.
Yeah.
And to me, while I disagree with that lifestyle, that's not my opinion. That's not my life, and they choose that life. I think for me, it's interesting to see that while the climate movement is more embraced in intersectionality, I think that it fails to practice some embodiments of culture of care. Now, the vegan movement, on the other hand, does a great job to enact some of those embodiments, but the behaviors behind it can sometimes be altruistic and absolute binary, which is extremely dangerous, because if we look at the popularized vegan movement today, it was in the late 2010s. And typically that messaging was around white, cis, straight individuals that were telling you to eat a lettuce and fruit and to eat raw vegan food, which was great for them. There's no issue there. But the issue was the lack of addressing the lack of access that people have to get equitable and nourishing food in their communities, and if they can even afford groceries, or where do they source their food.
Do you think the vegan movement has a white problem?
The vegan movement is racist. It's always been, I think, for me, a racist movement. And I mean that in the dominant popularized movement. So like if we look at some of the top vegan activists that have paved the way, they're white. Now, the issue isn't that they're white, right? The issue is the fact that, is this what media wanted to center at that time? And the answer is yes, because if we look back at when veganism was becoming a huge trend by many white influencers and white animal rights activists, they appealed to a large amounts of audience that were apolitical. So this is a parallel with the environmental movement. What gets people inspired about the environmental movement is typically conservation. People love to preserve natural ecosystems. They love the animals. The vegan movement did the same thing of framing it as, we're saving the animals. God forbid that you bring in race and white supremacy, because that is seen as something that is unacceptable. And I think, to me, the vegan movement today in the 2020s is that it's full of life. It's full of cultures, full of people like you, people like me. But the issue today is that those who stand on top of those platforms continue to use the same dissenting viewpoints and do not want to dig deeper beyond this idea of industrialized agriculture. Where does industrialized agriculture come from? Global capitalism. Where did global capitalism come from? Slavery, which is a violent institution that was created via white supremacy. Now, when you're digging deeper into why these industries are rooted in the oppressions of our communities, that is an uncomfortable conversation for many white people to have, because that allows you to have to reckon with the racist history that your ancestors committed / the continued oppression that these communities are suffering under. And when we don't talk about race, we will never achieve non-human animal liberation, because my liberation is also dependent on the liberation of species.
Wow. I was just clapping all the way through. You're so right about that, because so many times I've heard my animal rights activist friends say that the vegan movement does not need to be intersectional, and it should not be intersectional because it's just about the animals. So if you're focusing just on animal liberation, racism doesn't exist, sexism shouldn't exist. You shouldn't be talking about issues that are not about the animals. Which is why sometimes if you make it intersectional, they almost believe that you're taking a human supremacist point of view because you're talking about issues that affect people and not the animals, and it's not directly related. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I think the argument around human supremacy is quite unique, because when I talked about white veganism a few years ago, I think people saw it as, if I'm white and vegan, I'm the issue, right? No. What we're saying is that in a society that is inherently racist by design, and even people that are non-black, like myself too, uphold, racist beliefs that were embedded via bias, and we are all anti-racist. There's no such thing as someone being non-racist. Like, we've grown up in a racist world. But I think for white veganism is that when animal rights activists are frustrated around intersectionality, it's because they know that those large amounts of base of followers they're going to lose, but two is that it decenters them from the conversation. And this is where white saviorism and the animal rights movement comes in. Why is it that we're seeing animal rights organizations or animal rights, millionaires funding typically white men to go to the global south to spread the messaging around veganism, to convert black and brown people of color to that type of indoctrination? Because if you're able to remove the white supremacist and racist history of colonialism, then you're able to, again, fixate it on a human issue, that it's your fault that you cause industrial agriculture. It's my fault that I'm killing non-human animals today. And so it's a very manipulative tactic that's been used for decades. But because more and more history and education is being made accessible, like platforms like yourself and mine, those narratives are slowly crumbling, that the tactics that these dominant animal rights activists use are becoming quite dull. They actually haven't expanded in new theories and thoughts. And so when topics around white veganism come out, and I use a parallel around white feminism, right? White feminism excluded the voices of people who are trans, Black women, femmes, non-binary folks. And so when we are using these as parallel examples of history, we can know more and more that animal rights activists, it's not an issue if you're going to continue advocating for non-human animal liberation. It is an issue if you're trying to shut someone down when they're talking about the inclusion of racism that exists in the movement. And that itself, I have an issue with.
Because someone would argue saying you wouldn't talk about Palestine, you wouldn't go in those spaces, and if someone's like marching or protesting for that, you wouldn't go there and say, why aren't you talking about animals? Why aren't you talking about, veganism? What about that? What about animal liberation? So why are you coming in spaces that are meant for animal liberation and talking about human liberation?
Yeah, I mean, I agree that there's moments in time, there's moments when to have that conversation. Obviously, when you're attending different activist groups, there is a select issue that they're fighting for in liberation. But this is the limited mindset that many people have, is collective liberation, right? Collective liberation is recognizing that the rights and freedom that are happening in Palestine are closely tied to my rights and liberation here and to my community in Mexico and to the species of the world. That is something that I think people need to recognize, that liberation does not exist in singular sectors. It exists in a limitless spectrum that continues to expand beyond the universe. And so for me, I think it's important to note that when we have discussions and disagreements of like, yeah, you wouldn't tell someone to, advocate for certain things when they're participating in a certain protest.
Yeah.
But that's not to say that that's not on the person's mind, behind their mind, right? When I go to animal rights marches or I go to environmental marches, there's other things that are behind my mind too, that like racial justice, women's reproductive rights. These are all intersectional things. But I think when animal rights activists are angry at the world because they believe that no human is caring about it other than being vegan, they're failing to acknowledge, again, the history of indigenous communities that continue to live and fight for their lands. And no vegan can go and tell me, that lives neither in the global north or the global south, and tell me that, they don't agree with indigenous communities, because everyone can agree that indigenous communities have been protecting and continue to protect this world today. So we can continue to fight for this world.
There are a couple of videos that are going out right now, at least narratives that indigenous communities should go vegan as well, even though they've lived really close to nature. What do you have to say about indigenous community and their connection to veganism?
Yeah, I think indigenous communities are non-monolith. I think there are indigenous vegans who exist. They exist. They talk to their tribal communities. They have relationality to their ecosystems. They choose the lifestyle that they need. Now, if the narratives behind those that are saying that indigenous communities should go vegan are non-indigenous, they should not have any conversation about that. I don't think someone who is non-indigenous should be talking over indigenous communities. If they are people that come from privilege and background, of course you should talk about it to your friends. If they have access of wealth, they live in urban areas, they live in mansions, talk to them. Yes, of course, encourage them to go plant-based. But if your energy is focused on going towards indigenous communities to make them go vegan, it is a very colonial tactic. And we've seen that when colonialism began, for example, in the United States, where they destroyed their localized food systems and they saw their diets as inferior and tried to instill other products. And I think we have to remember that veganism itself is about compassion and getting as much as possible, not making everyone absolute in their mindset, because we know not everyone's going to go vegan in the world. That is something that I had to understand.
Yeah, I think I'm still trying to understand that, because I feel like even in the global south, we're so colonized, even our mindsets, like there is that residue of colonialism that's still there, because the British set up industrialized, organized dairy sector in India, and there are so many things that we didn't eat before. Like we didn't have yogurt, we didn't have cheese. All of that was introduced after the British set up organized dairy sector. And whenever I talk against it, it almost feels like I'm anti-Indian, like I'm going against the culture, I'm going against what people eat. That's how conditioned it is in our minds. And when I talk about veganism, the image that pops in people's heads is kale and avocado and anything that we eat in the global north, so just salads. But I'm like, what about millets? What about dishes that are predominantly Indian, that have historically come from our culture, that are vegan, that don't even have the word vegan, right? But there's so much of this that comes from our own cultures in the global south that don't get spoken about.
Yeah, and that goes into the lack of ecological wealth that many communities and people are born into this era, is the erased history of food systems, of what grows abundant in our areas. And that is super important to unpack, because in Mexico, right, we're known for, we people didn't know this, but Mexico used to have a large fungivore population. And a fungivore is people who eat a lot of mycelium. But now, today, right, what the culture is of eating in Mexico is like, we need to have heavy meat that is draining water resources in Mexico. Coca-Cola, that's not part of the culture. When in nature was Coca-Cola found? A brand was never found in nature. It was inspired by nature, but it was never found in the wild of a Coca-Cola bottle. So we as people now, growing up from our ancestors and our descendants of colonialism and other violent histories, we have that responsibility to reconnect and re-nurture those relationships. But is the education accessible? No, because not everyone has that right to learn.
Do you think you need to be rich to be sustainable or vegan?
Ooh, I love this question. So I think from the global north perspective is, fun fact, low income communities or people who are poor, live in rural areas or poverty, they are much more sustainable when it comes to emissions. So in America, the average person that grows up low income actually produces way less than those who come from affluent backgrounds. And so for me, I think when it comes about sustainability is, yes, I do agree that as someone who worked at a zero waste store, is that you do need to have excess of income to live more sustainably in the ways of your choices of products. Now, low-income people actually have rich cultural knowledge of sustainability already embedded in them. It's just that it's not marketable, it's not sellable, it's not glamorized. And that's the thing with sustainability, is that the popularized sustainability, plastic-free, zero waste, low waste lifestyle, whatever you may call it, whatever people say it these days, yeah, they cost money. And I found out that most people who buy these sustainability products are upper middle class women that are mothers. They're paving the way to make sure their kids are living sustainable. But with low income communities, we've always been sustainable. And that's something where it's a myth. It's something that's simply untrue, that poor people don't care about the environment. They're actually subjugated to pollution, and then they're blamed that it's their fault that their community is polluting the river or damaging the environment, when their community was never given resources to be able to manage that environment.
How do you explain environmental justice or environmental racism in the easiest possible way?
Oh, yeah. Environmental justice, the most easiest way for people to understand it is understanding that the policies and systems that are in place are unfair and contributing a burden to your community. And the easiest examples to explain environmental racism for anyone is that we are not saying that nature is racist. We are saying, because nature itself is a living system. It gives us life. It doesn't tell us that we can't enter the outdoors. It doesn't say, it doesn't believe in such boundaries or borders. But who decides where your factories are, where the pollution is, where the trash is going to go, is by design. It's by people. And typically when we talk about environmental racism, is that we are saying that the policies themselves are racist by design because they know, and the politicians who push these policies to say, I'm gonna go to my rural community in Mexico where everyone's poor and build a toxic factory there because I can get away with it. That is an injustice. And so when I talk about environmental justice, it means that you want to have clean air, water, and soil for all communities, for all races. But it's an emphasis on marginalized people because they're the ones right now who have faced the highest burdens, like people in the global south. Those communities are getting the most hit right now.
When people talk about scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, and how India and China are some of the most polluting countries in the world, it doesn't account for the fact that we produce so many goods that the global north consumes. That's just never taken into account or, into consideration when we're calculating all these emissions. And that just goes to show that India is facing some of the worst environmental disasters we've ever seen, whether that's, heat waves or droughts and flooding, whatnot. But they're not seen as symptoms of what has been caused by colonialism and capitalism, for that matter.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think America government and global north countries have done a very good job in presenting information that accuses and drags these countries along, and knowing that America has a large confluence of power to change that. If America was to commit more to loss and damage, if America was actually to get more serious on climate change, other countries would follow. And a lot of people look at America government as a very powerful force. I mean, it is. As an American, I'm actually scared of American government because I don't know what they're going to do to me if I lash out on them. But I don't want to go missing by the FBI.
Both of us. Yeah. Please find me.
Both of us after this episode.
You at least have an American passport. Where do I go?
Yeah, I'll be tracked by the government. Definitely. It's a creepy thing.
No,
but
we stand behind the government.
Yeah. And I think that it's important to know that America has had such a large confluence in geopolitics and international policy. And so for us to understand the narratives is that America's done a really good job in media and telling the media and the general consumers, like, these countries are dirty and polluting the planet. Therefore, we're going to continue doing business as usual to make sure to outsource it. I mean, plastic, for example, right? Yeah. It was found in Asia that a lot of these plastic in America is sent to Asian countries, which is why they have high amounts of plastic and America has low, because it's shipped out. And that's another example of how media and communications in America heavily continues us to say, look at these countries, they're doing bad. Even though they have a lot of natural resources, they have a lot of cultural traditions, and a lot of solutions are happening on the ground there.
We get shipped fast fashion clothes. We get shipped plastic bottles, as you said, like Philippines. I think there was a point where it was drowning in plastic that was exported. What has social media meant for you as a weapon, as a tool for creating change, for talking about things that matter to you, and where that message reaches and how that's received?
Social media to me is art. It's also dangerous, right? If you become too addicted on your phone. It's a reflection of my thoughts and the embodiments of my past lives. So when I talk about queer, brown, vegan, I love when people separate and they're able to criticize the brand and what it stands for. Are there concerns from people about the brand? Yes, they're welcome to critique. I know that regardless if queer, brown, vegan exists or not in 10, 15, 20 years, Isaias Hernandez is still alive. And I think that's the thing where I've always been ahead of the game for myself, is that you can tear me down as much as you can, but you will never know who I am in real life. And parts of what I share is memories of who I am or what I'm doing today. But that does not mean I'm entitled to your time. And the last thing I say is that I focus on legacy, not mediocrity and virality. Virality is not sustainable. It's never gotten somewhere to someone. You can be the biggest thing within the next 6 months of virality, but if you don't know how to manage that virality, you're out the door the next, because you know what? There's 100+ people in line. But for me, when I talk about legacy, is the work that I'm doing today is a cultural analysis and extension beyond the ways in which our other ancestors or other people who have paved the way for this space to be able to build on top of me. I can also build on top. And so I focus a lot of like my work today in climate education may not resonate with the general population today, but I bet you and yours and others' work out there will matter in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years when people are like, oh my God, I needed this years ago. And so I think when you set yourself up for legacy, it means that you're going to be here for the long game. And that's what I'm doing, is that I'm here to be here for a good time and a long time, not a short time.
That's beautiful. What does that legacy look like?
I think for me, my legacy that I want to leave behind is like accessible environmental media education. Like I want to be honestly not known, but I want to be honored and remembered as that I was someone that didn't have access and connections to the industries and built something from scratch and didn't have money to do it and built it and provided free environmental education for young people and older people too, of course, to learn about climate education and to learn with me of things I always wanted to learn. And so for them to take it away and to build their careers, to fall in love with environmentalism, that to me is the main goal. I'm like, I don't care if you don't follow me. If you watched the video and that inspired you, that's what we needed. How did we get inspired? By media, by stories. And so that's what I kind of want to leave behind. I don't want to be left behind of like, I never knew his name, but it was a queer brown vegan that did that, which is fun. But I also think that like, it's good to just be able to provide that sense of hopefully optimism and hope that I want other younger and older storytellers to delve into this space and to join us and to join the fight, because I can't be the only one that's a queer brown person. We need other queer brown vegans out there. There's a lot of them out there. So
yes.
I just trademarked mine earlier, but I'm just kidding. But like, I actually, not the first, but I'm sure there's a lot of queer brown vegans that have existed before me.
You've definitely made space for a lot of them to join in. A lot of young people are scared of getting in the space of impact or environmentalism. It almost feels like an opportunity cost that you're giving up a lucrative career, a money-making career, for something that doesn't make as much money. How do you tackle that?
Yeah, I love this question. Many people ask, like, are environmental degrees worth it after college? The answer is a bit ambiguous. It depends on how you use it, right? Like I had friends that after they majored in Berkeley worked at Shell and BP as environmental analysts. We're friends, but I give it to them like, oh, so when are you gonna leave your job to like leave that industry? But I get why they work in the industry in terms of like some of them chose financial stability for their families, which is hard, right? Because I have no say to talk to someone, especially because I'm an influencer. I promote consumerism. I may not work with those exploitative industries, but I'm privileged that I have that career. I tell young people the importance about, environmental degrees is that it depends on how you use it. For most young people, what they do, and this is what I used to do, is that you go to these networking events and people want to give their resume and their email to the person they just met. That is the number one wrong issue to do. You want to build a relationship with people. It's like you're meeting a new friend. You don't go up to a new friend and be like, here's my friendship qualities and can you be my friend?
Yeah.
No, I would be like, get away from me. I don't know who you are. Are you drunk? I would be like, let's sit down on the couch and talk about our values and who you are. What's your story? And so I think for young people today, we need to really get away from like the idea of like environmental nonprofits are the only environmental jobs, because I believe that. My first job out of college, I thought I was going to work at the biggest green NGOs. I got rejected from Greenpeace, NRDC, the Sierra Club, Nature Conservancy, WWF. They all told me, you do not have good climate skills documented. And I was like, well, I have research. I did activism. I also we've got an environmental science degree. It's competitive out there. It's true. My jobs went to people that had masters. I couldn't fight with that. But what I could understand is that there's corporate sustainability, there's consulting, there's different ways that you can get a job. And to be quite frank, my first job out of college was at a creative agency. And guess how I got that job? I emailed the founder. I don't know who they were. I just emailed them. I have never gotten a job traditionally by applying. And I think a lot of younger generations also think the same. Some do, go through that. But for me, I've never had that luck. The luck I had was just being able to talk to people and they liked me and then they were like, I want to work with you. And so for me, that's how I think about business today on Queer Brown Vegan. It's like I work with people who I want to invest in and they want to invest in me.
So creating the job that you want, even if it doesn't exist.
Yeah, create it, even if you don't know. Like when I created Queer Brown Vegan, it was 2019, and I created it because my friend was like, you should talk on social media. Just like you were saying about being shy, is I was like, no, people are going to make fun of me. My friends are going to be like, oh, he just wants to be an influencer. And now it's my full-time job. But I think it took a lot out of me to understand, like, this is the way I want to teach people through storytelling. This is the way I want to help people out as much as possible. And that was something where I had to understand business, is that I was doing free environmental education work for 2 years straight until it became my full-time job. I think younger people today, it's very easy for, everyone does it, to compare themselves. And I sense younger people at times that are getting into environmental media work. It's like, I want to be in these rooms. I should be this. I should do this. I should be that. You should. You deserve it. But you have to work for it.
Yeah.
You don't just come into a room where I meet you and you're like, connect me with this person. Excuse me, I have a name. You don't talk to people that way. And I remind young people is that it's so easy for us to get lost. The people I look up to and I inspire that are in their 30s have been doing this way before me. They're in a different level of their career and their life. I'm in a different level of my career and life. And it's important that we don't become not bitter, but to not use envy as a tool to disarm and hurt people, but to recognize jealousy is normal. It's a normal emotion. We've all gone through it. I've gone through it. But the way that you act on jealousy showcases your true character. And I know for sure when I see people that act in that way of extractive, I know that they're not going to make it.
Because I think it's just trying to tell you, jealousy is just trying to tell you what is it that you really want.
Yeah.
And if you use that as a way to guide you, I think that's great. But you're right. It's just how you channelize that.
Yeah, and there's people who are honest. They're like, I want to be famous. That's great. But if you use that to destroy people that are your friends, you're never gonna get anywhere. The only biggest disappointment is yourself. And I tell people too, like, I'm thankful for where I'm at in a very small community, and I don't care if people recognize me on the streets or not. If they do, I say hi and we talk. But seeing people desire that in the spaces, I do think it's the dangers of even climate media. People like me, like, did I create that dream for other people? And that's something where I've talked to other creators that are my age of like, did we create this solution for younger people to believe this? And that's something where I've had to hold myself accountable of, like, the people I choose to mentor, I never want them to strive that way. I want them to, yes, grow your platform, do your things, but stay true to who you are always. Be kind, show up for people. Do not show up and be nice for people because you want something from them. And I've seen that a lot with not younger people, but adults, people my age, older people.
So how do you go vegan? What was your vegan catalyst?
I think for me, like, I always tell people, and people always think he's an environmental vegan, because there's different classifications of vegan, the health vegan, the animal vegan, and then the environmental vegan.
Yeah, the vegan vegans would tell you it's only animal vegan and no other
and they're like,
vegan should exist.
Environmental vegan. I'm like, I mean, you just don't like when I have to talk about racism. That's why you call me an environmental vegan, because I interconnect the oppressions of humans and non-human animals that fall under the AFCO said this fall under the umbrella of white supremacy, of speciesism and racism being intertwined. They're not the same thing, but they're tied together under the dominant structure.
Tell me about that.
Yeah, I think when we talk about human supremacy and white supremacy is white supremacy actually allows us to illustrate more effectively of that by design. Why is it that we have certain isms and phobias that exist in our society? So sexism, speciesism, racism, misogyny, misogynoir, transphobia, homophobia. These are all conditions that existed via an institution, right? Whether that was religion, whether that through education of indoctrination, and the displacements of indigenous communities, and colonialism. And so when people are telling me, like, you know, what is more important, I say everything is important for me, and everything that I talk about is interconnected. And because I don't mention it doesn't mean I'm not thinking about it. So I think that's something, to me, like, my vegan journey was just recognizing that industrialized systems are products of white supremacy. The people who implemented these industries were not our communities. It wasn't indigenous communities that said, we want to make industrial agriculture. It was global capitalism. And who funded and fueled global capitalism? Colonialism. And that's something where we tend to think, oh, it's in the past. It's in the past. Neo-colonialism exists. Now, guess who's working in those industries now? People like us, our people. But we tend to say, oh, it's their fault. Our fault? Last time I checked, who owns these industries? Monopolies? Who owns the monopolies? Billionaires. So I think that those are the things where I like, but I like to talk about. But I think for me, when I went vegan, I remember just thinking, I had this assignment where we had to talk about what's more like regenerative, or it was more organic before regenerative entered the discussion.
Yeah.
What's more organic, like GMO meat or non-GMO? And I guess we had to argue my team, like, what's more sustainable and organic. We found out that, I guess, like, non-GMO meat uses less emissions, but you still slaughtered the animal. So I was like, well, the animals die both ways. So I was like, I don't know if, like, I don't know. I just was like, I felt weird, like, be like, yeah, support organic meat. But then I was like, I used to eat meat too. So I was like, well, you know, and I think what got me more invested is just realizing from a ecological standpoint that the systems that we have for industrialized agriculture is poisoning everyone, humans, non-human animals, species, wild, like, you know, emissions. And to me, I was like, oh, from an environmentalist perspective, it makes sense for me, as someone who is privileged enough to attend a, you know, high public university and have some money, to go vegan. Like, why can't I? I should do it. And I remember telling my friends, I was like, I'm gonna go vegan, and they all laughed at me because they didn't believe that I could. And I was like, I hope they did. I mean, now they do, but they're like, you know, they even teased me when they're like, you no longer party or drink anymore. And I'm like, yeah, I'm like a grandpa with my cane these days, walking around by like 9 p.m. to bed. Like,
that's me right now, and I love it.
Right? Yeah, it's honestly the best. We need more people to join the squad here. But I think, I think that moment realized of, like, oh, I can do something about it from an individual lifestyle, made me feel more empowered, just to be like, I can do something about something. And yeah, I think at the end of college, I went vegan.
Wow.
Because of the class.
So you're pro-justice, anti-colonial vegan. That's the bucket I would put you in.
Yeah.
Apart from the health, animal, environment bucket. I think, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's been something very much, I saw veganism always as a radical political ideology to embody yourself to be a better human and better person and better species to Earth. So I think for me, it made sense to adopt those beliefs. But I think, to me too, I think there's different ways that people can envision that for themselves too. And I think I'm more comfortable with people, you know, eating what they want under the assumption that they're trying to reduce or transition more to whole plant-based.
I'm trying to fight with this narrative myself. Do you think you can be an environmentalist and not be vegan?
I think the question needs to be reframed more about, like, how can we enhance a world that is more sustainable for you to reduce the consumption of non-human animals? And I think, to me, there's different ways that people embody environmentalism. And to me, that's what I like about the diversity of stories, is that we may not agree that you're not vegan, but I agree with the fact that you're trying to make sure that my home is also protected through a different lens. Even if I don't see it that way, I know many people who are non-vegan are against industrialized systems and agriculture. They're trying to dismantle that industry. So I think for me is, what is an environmentalist at the end of the day? Because I still don't know what an environmentalist is. I call myself an environmentalist, right? Or the media calls me one, but I to this day don't know what an environmentalist looks like or embodies. I just know it's someone that cares for living earth and cares for you. But that's such a vague way to look at it, right? I think a more cohesive way is just recognizing what can we do to make sure our world is better, accessible, and safe and ecologically sound for all people.
Yeah, I think that's the world we're trying to create.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I'm working on 2 web series. It's called Sustainable Jobs and Teaching Climate Together. So Sustainable Jobs is basically a way to look into green career related industries. And I go with my team to companies to venture out and to learn about their sustainability practices, but also how to produce a product. Like, put me on the supply chain line. Let me talk to the R&D lab. Let me talk to the sustainability manager and learn more about what they do. I think it's really interesting to me when you work with companies that are trying to do well, because it gives hope to younger people. And the other one is more like a Teaching Climate Together, which is focused on environmental education. I'm very inspired by shows like PBS and like networks like that did like really good environmental science shows. And to me, I wanted to really work with academic scholars, grassroots activists, or scientists who are doing really cool work and defining a terminology, but also showcasing how do you think about your mind and like reframing those relationships. And honestly, they've given me so much life to do long form content. I love doing it. Yeah.
That's so cool. I'm really excited for that web series.
Yeah.
And a book.
Yeah, and a book too. A book hopefully next year. We've been delayed for a few years. I know it's been on the go, but I think now is the time to reblossom that narrative.
For sure, it's gonna be here on the coffee table next time I see you. We're gonna have a massive copy right there.
Thank you. I hope so.
I had a question which is much earlier on, but it was about, you emphasize looking at the history of environmental movements beyond mainstream narratives. Is there an example of a story or movement from history that you think deserves more attention?
Yeah, I think for me, the best story for environmentalism is the environmental justice movement in the 1960s in the United States. Basically, in America, the way that it started is that it was started by people that were typically wouldn't call themselves environmentalists, people who were sanitation workers that were being poisoned at their work, and raising the alarms with their communities of like, not only are they poisoning us at work, they're poisoning our homes. And if you look at it, many of those communities that were being poisoned were Black and brown people of color. And why was that? Segregation? Segregation, I guess, it's not something controversial. Segregation exists in the United States. White communities did not want any quote unquote colored communities in those areas. And so for me, it was important to understand that the environmental justice movement isn't also just about advocating for everyone. It's an emphasis on these working class people who were the most affected and poisoned by environmental destruction, by companies that did not care about their health and knew the chemicals and products and the emissions and pollution that they were causing, but chose not to say anything because it would cost them money to fix those things. And to me, that's one of those spaces where I feel that when you learn about the environmental justice movement, it allows you to have more context of the work that we do today. It's like we believe that justice is not something that is a radical idea. It is an addition and has always been part of how we live.
What's the opposite of environmentalism? I was going to ask because it was a long-winded question too. I was going to ask a relationship between patriarchy and the opposite of environmentalism, which is extraction or capitalism. How do you frame, what is anti-environment?
Yeah, anti-environmentalism is quite unique. So in US, the anti-environmentalism movement was basically a movement of corporations and lobbyists that poured millions of dollars to add climate misinformation, disinformation. Like kind of like, if you open a textbook, for anyone out there, open a textbook and it says the benefits of climate change and it says happy cows and sunnier days. That's a
I can't believe
lie.
that's a thing.
Yeah, I remember reading it in middle school. So a lot of people are getting indoctrinated by those types of narratives. But it's important to know that anti-environmentalism is focused on the continued expansion of economic growth no matter what. So when we allow a model that has also been told by economists that's actually not an accurate and it's a very dangerous model to base predictions on, is that we may be making more wealth, but that's not tied towards our happiness nor our liberation.
Yeah.
And so in a society that's already choosing to degrade the land, degrade women, degrade other species, and degrade gender, racialized minorities, we are then mistreating our cultures. We're mistreating our ancestors who fought to be here today. I keep thinking about all the women and men who continue to live for us to be alive, even if we don't know them, even the future generations of me don't exist, like where they'll be. And so I think it is important that we remember anti-environmentalism is just something that is simply disappearing in my world. And even it's like that mosquito that wants to continue to pester, but it doesn't exist.
Yeah. I see a lot of sustainability and green content everywhere. I've seen an increase in that for sure. Has there been any change since you started creating content and since you started talking about being vegan? What does that space look like? And do you think there's just room for more and more growth?
Yeah, I think there's always room for everyone to do storytelling. I've never been like an advocate of like, oh, well, I'm doing like if you're doing podcasts, I don't see people see it as like, oh, I'm the only environmental podcast that I can do. People are like, we should have more because you're reaching new audiences that I don't have. And I think it's important for people to know that doing sustainability related content is actually a service to the earth. It's contributing to better media storytelling in a climate positive world. And so we need people doing the good news. We need people doing the education. We need people doing the lifestyles. We need everyone in this space. Obviously, when it comes to copying, that's a different discussion, right? Like I've had people try to copy my writing and I'm like, okay, well, I can know that this is my writing because I literally wrote it and you have typos on it. So those are things where I've, I mean, there's moments of people copy
but
work.
you're reaching people and flattery is the best form of compliment.
Yeah,
but yeah,
exactly. And
that
it doesn't make
doesn't
sense.
have to be plagiarism.
Yeah, and they won't make it far in that end if they do.
Yeah.
But like I do think it's important to like always say that while we're seeing this increase of billions of views and like increase of environment, how do we measure that impact? And I think as media creators, that is hard to do is like, what is the impact of someone who follows me? Did they follow up on environmental behavior? We will never know. But what I do know is that you change the hearts of someone and that person's going to go navigate the world in a better space. And we don't know how they're going to do it because we don't track them. We shouldn't track them. But we know that we hope that they're going to do something better for the world.
Yeah. I don't think it's quantifiable in that sense. You'll never know. You'll never know who's listening. You'll never know what seed that planted. But for me, it's about planting that seed, right? And just letting that blossom however it blossoms. But I also hope it goes beyond trends. I've seen the whole zero waste movement. I've seen your waste in a jar. I've seen, the de-influencing movement. Recently was the whole underconsumption core, right?
Yeah.
I hope it goes beyond these like trends, right? Yeah. Because it's so much more. We're avoiding the bigger conversation. What do you have to say to creators with that, the responsibility that comes with it and what we're ignoring?
Yeah, continue pushing new narratives that are actually sustainable. Microtrends are great. Go get your followers if you need it. But you know what's not sustainable long term? A dying planet. So if you want to create your microtrends, make sure that you're going to actually save the planet at the same time and get people to become political, to become like joyful, to become a servant of Earth. Because to me, that means that you actually are creating a more impactful story. When we're allowing people to just stay on a microtrend, virality is dead. It doesn't inspire people. Underconsumption, right? That was blowing up a few months ago.
Yeah.
Where is it now? It's not trending anymore.
But I'm like, it's not even a trend. You saw me. My reusable bottle is everywhere. I was doing it for years before it was cool. It's not even about buying a new one. It's just always been with me, right?
Yeah.
So it's not like consumption or under consumption. It was just lifestyle.
Like, use less. That's it. Like,
yeah. Yeah, that's so true. But you're right. We're ignoring the bigger conversation about systemic changes, right? And that's what we're all fighting for.
Yeah.
What would happen if everyone went vegan tomorrow?
Okay, if everyone went vegan tomorrow, this is a wild thing. What I do, I cut off chips recently, like a few months back.
You cut what? Sorry,
Chips.
Chips. Yeah.
Which are potatoes, they're vegan, but we'd all be eating carrots as chips, which is so weird. I eat raw carrots and I just eat them.
No.
And I just see it as a chip. I don't know why. It's such a weird thing. I'm so obsessed with
How
carrots.
does your brain see a carrot as a potato?
I don't know.
No.
But I just eat it. I'm just like, okay, this is great.
Raw carrot.
Yeah.
Nothing. You don't dehydrate it. You don't bake it in the oven.
No,
nothing.
Just eat it like that.
What?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Okay.
I'm such a weirdo on that.
The worst comment you've ever received that actually stayed with you.
Oh, the worst comment I received online is I posted a photo of me eating a burger at a vegan place, and someone said, "You shouldn't be eating that. It's unhealthy for you."
And that was the worst comment. Like, that got to you.
Yeah, because I was like, I can't even post food anymore. People are attacking me. It's vegan too. I was like, I don't know what they think it is.
Favorite sustainable brands, quickly. 5.
Okay, 5
Let's
sustainable brands.
Yeah,
I love.
rapid fire.
Okay.
Let's go.
Traditional medicinals, Atique, Rebel Cheese, Tyndall Foods, and Melody Honey. That's
Ooh.
not made out of bees. It's made of like a plant.
Love that. Okay. One environmental myth you wish more people knew the truth about.
Wish cycling is real, meaning that we really don't recycle things that should be recycled.
Okay. Favorite vegan dish to cook at home?
I haven't been home in weeks, so that's actually a good question. I miss home. I guess I would just say I make a good stir fry with cactus, rice, beans, and potatoes. Yeah, cactus. We eat cactus in Latin America a lot. Like Mexico, I'm obsessed with cactus.
Love it. So cactus, mushroom, and carrots. I just need to give you 3 ingredients and you're going to be happy.
Oh, yes. I can survive
pretty much.
off of that. Yeah.
A book that changed the way you think about activism, or a book that changed you.
Oh, okay, this is so basic, but The Power of Now, it's like a manifestation book. It's a self-help spiritual book. So there's actually nothing climate related. But what I liked about it is that it tells you not how to manifest the people in your life, but it actually makes you ask critical questions to yourself of how you've seen life. And I read it when I was 22, I was after I graduated college, and I would read the book on the train. I used to read books when I would go to work. Now I don't, because I have to work remote.
Yeah.
And it was actually a very powerful read. It just teaches you so much about how to reframe your life and questions. And I think it helped me in my industry today.
That's amazing. Do you want to talk about any book that changed your activism?
Yes.
In this space? Anything you've read in this space?
Yes, the book Eating Animals. It was really good. I believe it's a Jewish writer, and he talks about how his faith and religion influenced the way that he stopped eating meat, and talked about what he found out. But then at the end of the book, I think he ends up not being vegan. But regardless of that, I think it was a really good way of exploring his journey, but also what made him go certain ways.
That's cool. One word to describe your relationship with nature.
Ooh, charisma. I love nature, and she loves me back, hopefully.
Okay, so it's reciprocal. That's the word we'll go with. If you could be any plant, what plant would you be?
Monstera.
Oh, that's a beautiful plant. I love that plant.
They're easy to grow too, so I like them.
You have to delete all the apps on your phone and you get to keep 3. Which 3 would you keep?
LinkedIn, Instagram, and Google Calendar.
Wow. Okay. No WhatsApp. No Safari.
No WhatsApp. I'm you find me another time.
Weirdest sustainable habit you've picked up? What's the weirdest thing that you do that's sustainable?
I walk to the grocery store. I don't drive. It's like a 15-minute walk.
That's not weird.
Yeah, I've seen. Yeah, it's like
you juggle to carry groceries back.
Yeah, it's hard for me to carry the groceries back. It hurts my arms, but I I reduce emissions.
Fair. If you could ban one thing forever, what would you ban?
Cars.
Okay. Yeah? EVs, everything included? Like you would just ban cars?
Like gas cars.
Okay. The most surprising thing you've learned about climate activism?
It's a really fun space. It's a playground where you get to actually experience different forms of art. And I think it's such a beautiful space. Obviously, it's not perfect. It's like a family. It has its issues. Not everyone's going to like each other, but we have the ability to work together too.
Any advice to anyone listening to this?
Yeah, believe in yourself and continue to put your work out there. You just never know who will see it. And honestly, I think it's a beautiful process for people to get inspired by other people and collaborate. And don't be afraid to email people and reach out.
Love that. Since it's sustainability with Shreya, we always end with, what does sustainability mean to you? And I'm going to record that.
Oh my God, I love it.
Right. Oh, you're so white and overexposed right now.
It's a little bad on that one.
All right, let's go.
Sustainability to me is a cultural foundation that seeks to expand our minds to achieve limitless futures.
I love that definition. I love that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for doing this with me.
We'll see what makes it into the episode. It'll be fun.
This was such a fun conversation and I learned so much from it. More power to you, and I hope you keep growing and doing the work that you do, because I know it's changed the lives of so many. And thank you for being a role model for so many people that didn't have a role model, just as you and I didn't when we were growing up.
Yeah.
So thank you for your work, the animals, the planet, the marginalized communities. On behalf of everyone, thank you for everything that you do. And I'm super grateful for this conversation.
Thank you. And thank you for your work too. I mean, I can't wait until you're in your 600 episode looking back at the beginning ones.
And look at this. This is going to be one of the most formative ones, at least. Yeah.
Click like and subscribe.
Love that little CJ. But thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yay. We're done.